The belt snapped. A quiet pop echoed in the small hallway, followed by a startled gasp. I hadn't even pulled that hard. James, my 16-year-old stepson, froze in place. His jeans sagged an inch lower on his hips, the loose waistband slipping against his slim frame. He grabbed at them instinctively, his ears turning red. Sorry, I didn't think it was that worn out," I said quickly, holding up the frayed leather strap. James looked down at the broken belt, then back at me. His lips pressed into a thin line, his brows furrowed. I knew that look. It was the same one his father used to have when things didn't go as planned. "It's fine," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. But I could hear the frustration underneath his words. It wasn't just about the belt. It never was. I took a breath, steadying my voice. "Let me grab one of your dad's old belts. It should fit you." James hesitated before nodding. I turned toward the bedroom, my heart unexpectedly heavy. It wasn't the belt that was broken. It was us, and I wasn't sure how to fix that. I never expected to be a stepmother. It wasn't in my life plan. Yet, here I was, standing in the dim hallway of a house that still smelled like my late husband's cologne, holding a broken belt and watching my stepson try to avoid looking at me. "My name is Rebecca. I married David 5 years ago, after a whirlwind romance that had felt like fate. He was a man of quiet strength, a devoted father, and the love of my life. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. A car accident took him from us last year, leaving behind a void too large to fill. James, his only son, had never been an easy kid. Stubborn, independent, a little too much like his father. But after David's death, he built a wall around himself, one I hadn't been able to break through. I tried. God, I tried. I kept up the house the way David would have wanted. I made dinner every night, even when James barely touched his plate. I asked about his day, only to get monosyllabic answers. It was like living with a ghost. 2 ghosts, really. One that had left us, and one that refused to let me in. Our home was once warm and filled with laughter. Now, it felt like a museum, frozen in time. David's books still sat untouched on the shelf. His leather jacket hung by the door. His presence lingered in every room, and neither of us knew how to move forward. Outside, the neighborhood carried on as if nothing had changed. The distant hum of cars passing by, the laughter of kids playing on the sidewalk, it all felt so normal. But inside, the silence between James and me grew heavier by the day. And now, something as simple as fixing a broken belt had made me realize just how fragile our connection was. James sighed, shifting awkwardly. "Look, I'll just tie a shoelace through the loops or something." "It's fine." I tightened my grip on the torn leather. "No, James, it's not fine. I can fix this." But we both knew I wasn't just talking about the belt. The belt was just another thing broken between us. But it wasn't the real problem. James muttered something under his breath and turned toward his room, clearly ready to end the conversation. "Wait," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "Just give me a second. Your dad's belts are still in the closet." His shoulders tensed, but he didn't argue. He just stood there, arms crossed, jaw tight. I moved quickly, pushing open the door to the master bedroom. The air was thick with dust and memories. I hadn't gone through David's things, not really. I told myself it was because I was too busy, that I'd do it when the time felt right. But the truth was, I wasn't ready to let go. I opened the closet and ran my fingers over the hanging clothes, the familiar scent of leather and faded aftershave clinging to the fabric. Then I saw it, one of David's old belts, looped neatly over a hanger. It was worn but sturdy. I grabbed it and turned back toward the door, only to find James standing there. His eyes were locked on the closet, on his father's things. "I didn't know you kept all this," he said, his voice quieter than before. I swallowed. I wasn't sure what to do with it. He stepped inside hesitantly, reaching for a familiar gray hoodie, David's favorite. His fingers brushed the sleeve, and for a second, he looked like a little boy again, searching for something familiar, something safe. Then, before I could say anything, he turned to me with a guarded expression. "Can I have this?" I nodded. Of course. As he pulled the hoodie over his head, something shifted between us. It wasn't a grand gesture. Just a moment. A crack in the wall he had built. But then, as if catching himself, James cleared his throat and changed the subject. So the belt. I handed it over, watching as he threaded it through his jeans. He gave a small nod of approval. It fits. I smiled, but before I could respond, my phone buzzed from the nightstand. A text message. Rebecca, we need to talk. It's about James. Call me back as soon as possible. The sender's name made my stomach twist. Principal Hensley. I looked up at James. He must have seen the concern in my face because he immediately stiffened. What? He asked. I hesitated. What had he done? And why was I only finding out now? I gripped my phone, my pulse quickening. James, I said carefully, trying to keep my voice even. Did something happen at school? His face hardened in an instant. No. The response was too quick, too sharp. I had spent enough time around him to know when he was holding something back. The principal's message burned in my mind, but I knew better than to push right away. Instead, I exhaled and put the phone down. I'll call back later. James frowned, as if he expected me to press him for answers. Instead, I turned and walked out of the room. Dinner will be ready in 10. I heard him let out a breath of relief behind me. After dinner, when James had retreated to his room, I finally called Principal Hensley. I wanted to reach out before this gets worse, he said, his voice laced with concern. James has been skipping classes. His grades have dropped significantly. And today he got into a fight. I sat down slowly, my grip tightening around the phone. A fight? With another student. No one was seriously hurt, but it's not like him. I rubbed my temples. No, it's not. There's more, Hensley continued. His teachers say he's been shutting down, refusing to participate, ignoring assignments. I know he's been through a lot, but we need to figure out how to help him. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Thank you for telling me. After hanging up, I sat there in silence. I knew James was struggling, but I hadn't realized how bad it had gotten. I stood, taking a deep breath before heading to his room. His door was slightly open, and I knocked before stepping in. He was lying on his bed, scrolling through his phone, pretending not to notice me. We need to talk, I said gently. James didn't look up. About what? School. The fight. Skipping classes. His whole body tensed. Hensley called you. He's worried. So am I. He let out a humorless laugh. Yeah, well, don't be. It's not like I got expelled. That's not the point, James. This isn't you. His eyes darkened. You don't know me. I felt my patience fraying, but I forced myself to stay calm. Then help me understand. He sat up abruptly, eyes burning with frustration. You want to understand? Fine. I hate school. I hate coming home to a house that feels like a graveyard. I hate how everyone acts like I should be okay by now. But I'm not, and I don't think I ever will be. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I know you miss him, I said softly. I do too. He shook his head. No, you don't. Not like I do. He was my dad, and now I'm stuck with you. Silence. A deep, cutting silence that made it hard to breathe. I had known he resented me, but hearing it out loud was something else entirely. I swallowed my pain and met his gaze. I'm not trying to replace him, James. Then stop acting like you can fix everything, he snapped. Because you can't. He turned away, and I knew I had lost him, at least for tonight. I left the room quietly, but as I shut the door behind me, I felt the weight of every unsaid word pressing down on my chest. For the next few days, James avoided me more than usual. But I didn't push. Instead, I tried a different approach. One evening, I knocked on his door and, without waiting for an invitation, left a small plate of cookies on his desk. Just like his dad used to. He didn't acknowledge it, but later that night, the plate was empty. The next day, I drove him to school instead of letting him take the bus. The car ride was quiet, but before he got out, I said, I know things are hard, but skipping class won't make it better. For a moment, I thought he'd ignore me. But then, Without looking back, he muttered, "Whatever." It wasn't much, but it was something. One afternoon, a few weeks later, I was cleaning out the garage when I found an old box of David's things, stuff I hadn't had the heart to go through. Inside, I found a baseball glove, a few photos, and a notebook filled with scribbled notes from David to James. Memories flooded back. David used to write little messages to James, reminders of things they'd do together. "Proud of you, kiddo. Can't wait to see you play this weekend." Simple, but full of love. I hesitated, then brought the notebook inside. I placed it on James's desk without saying a word. That night, I heard something unexpected. A quiet knock on my door. James stood there, the notebook in his hands. His eyes looked different, not angry. Just tired. "Where'd you find this?" he asked. "In the garage." He nodded, flipping through the pages. "I forgot about this." I waited, giving him space. After a long pause, he whispered, "I don't think Dad would be proud of me anymore." My heart broke. "James," I said carefully, "your dad was always proud of you. And he still would be." He looked down at the pages, tracing his fingers over his father's handwriting. Then, finally, he said something I never expected. "I don't know how to do this without him." His voice cracked. And just like that, the wall he had built around himself crumbled. I stepped forward hesitantly. "You don't have to do it alone." For the first time in months, he didn't pull away when I placed a hand on his shoulder. We stood there, in the quiet of the room, both grieving, both healing. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we might just find a way forward together. The real test came sooner than I expected. It was a Friday afternoon when I got the call. "Rebecca, it's Principal Hensley again." His voice was strained. "I need you to come to the school. James got into another fight." My stomach dropped. "Is he okay?" "He's fine, but this time it's serious." I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door, my heart pounding the entire drive to the school. When I arrived, I found James sitting outside the principal's office, his arms crossed, a fresh bruise forming on his cheek. He wouldn't look at me. Inside, Principal Hensley gave me the full story. Another student, Ryan, had been harassing a younger kid, shoving him against the lockers, calling him names. James had stepped in. Words were exchanged. Then punches. James had thrown the first punch. "We have a zero-tolerance policy for violence," Hensley said, folding his hands on the desk. "James is suspended for a week." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I understand." "I don't," James muttered from his seat. "You're punishing me for doing the right thing." Hensley's expression softened. "I appreciate that you were standing up for someone, James. But violence isn't the answer." James scoffed and looked away. I turned to him, choosing my words carefully. "I know why you did it." His jaw tightened. He was hurting that kid. Someone had to stop him. My heart ached with pride and frustration all at once. He was trying. He just didn't know how to channel it yet. After we left the office, I drove in silence for a while before finally speaking. "You're a good kid, James." He let out a dry laugh. "I just got suspended. That doesn't change what I said." I glanced at him. "Your dad would have been proud of you for standing up for someone who needed help." His fingers tightened around the seatbelt. "Then why does it feel like I screwed up?" "Because doing the right thing isn't always easy," I said softly. "And sometimes it comes with consequences." He exhaled, looking out the window. "I don't know how to be good at this. At life. At any of it." I swallowed past the lump in my throat. "Neither do I. But we figure it out together." For the first time, he looked at me, really looked at me. And this time, he didn't look away. James's suspension felt like a setback, but in some ways, it became a turning point. For the first time in a long time, he was forced to slow down. No school. No escape into routines or distractions. Just time. With himself, with me, with the reality of everything we had both been avoiding. At first, he spent most of his days in his room, avoiding conversation. But I didn't push. Instead, I made sure he knew I was there. I cooked meals, left the door open whenever I was in the living room, and even set out a few of his dad's old things, quiet reminders that he wasn't alone. It took a few days, but eventually, something shifted. One evening, I found him sitting in the kitchen, flipping through his dad's old notebook. The same one I had given him weeks ago. His expression was different, softer, more thoughtful. He used to write down everything, James muttered almost to himself. Even dumb little things, like what we ate for breakfast. I smiled, sitting across from him. He never wanted to forget the small moments. James nodded, tracing the ink with his fingers. I wish I had done that. I hesitated. You still can. He glanced up, confused. I gestured toward the empty journal I had placed near the fruit bowl a few days ago, hoping he'd notice. It won't bring him back, but writing things down might help you hold on to the memories. For a moment, I thought he'd brush it off. But instead, he reached for the notebook, flipping through the blank pages. He didn't say anything, but the way he held it told me everything I needed to know. That night, I heard the faint scratch of a pen from his room. A small victory. A step forward. James's first day back at school was tense. He didn't say much during the drive, just stared out the window, lost in thought. When we pulled up, he finally spoke. They're gonna think I'm just some violent kid now. I met his gaze. People will think whatever they want. What matters is what you do next. He exhaled, gripping the strap of his backpack. Then, before stepping out, he surprised me. I know I made mistakes, he admitted, but I don't want to be that guy anymore. It was the first time he had ever acknowledged his actions as something he had control over. And in that moment, I knew he was changing. The real confirmation came a few weeks later. I was sorting through mail when I heard a knock at the front door. When I opened it, I found a woman standing there looking nervous. Hi, I'm Lisa, she said. My son Alex goes to James's school. I frowned slightly. Is something wrong? Her face softened. No, actually, I wanted to thank you. She hesitated, then smiled. James stood up for my son when no one else did. Alex, he's been getting bullied for a while, and that day, when James stepped in, it meant everything to him. I felt a lump form in my throat. Lisa glanced over her shoulder, and that's when I noticed a small boy standing behind her, clutching a book to his chest. Alex. He looked shy, hesitant, until James appeared behind me, stepping onto the porch. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Alex swallowed and said, Thanks for what you did. James rubbed the back of his neck, looking a little uncomfortable. Yeah, no problem. Lisa smiled warmly. I just wanted you to know that what you did mattered. After they left, I turned to James. That was a pretty big deal. He shrugged, but there was a small smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, I guess. And just like that, I knew we had turned a corner. Later that night, James sat beside me on the couch, flipping through his dad's notebook again. This house still feels weird sometimes, he admitted. Like he should be here, but he's not. I nodded. I know. He glanced at me. Do you ever feel like you don't know how to do this? All the time. He smirked slightly. At least we're both clueless together. I chuckled. Yeah, but we're figuring it out. He leaned back, flipping to a blank page in the notebook. Then, with a deep breath, he picked up a pen and started writing. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a complete fix, but it was something. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Hope that we could rebuild. Hope that, despite the pain, we would be okay. Not just as two people trying to survive loss, but as family. Months passed, and little by little, James changed. It wasn't an overnight transformation. He still had his moments of frustration, still wrestled with his emotions, but there was something different about him. A quiet strength, a willingness to try. He joined a mentorship program at school, helping younger kids who struggled like he once had. He started writing more, filling pages of the journal with thoughts he once would have kept locked away. And every now and then, he'd share a story or a memory with me, small glimpses into his heart that I had once feared would stay closed forever. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, he hovered near the doorway, looking unsure. There's this awards ceremony at school next week, he muttered. For leadership stuff. My teacher nominated me. I set down the dish towel, raising an eyebrow. James, that's amazing. He shrugged, but I could see the pride flickering beneath his usual tough exterior. "Yeah, I guess." I smiled. I wouldn't miss it for the world. And in that moment, I realized how far we had come. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were building something new. Not perfect, not without struggles, but real. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel so uncertain. It felt hopeful.